Hey quilters! We are in week 2 of our Pinwheel Popper Quilt Along, hosted by me and Melanie from Southern Charm Quilts. Last week, in week 1, we just selected our fabric. I've got a little video going over a little bit about how to pick fabrics for this one and cut our pieces. And I do have a demo for how I cut these pieces. If you want to check that out, I'll link it in the description. But before we get too much farther, if you've not signed up for this quilt along yet, go ahead and do that. It's free. The pattern is free. And I'll have the link for signing up in the description. I'll keep the signups open as long as the quilt along is going on, and after it's finished, I'll have all the links to all the blog posts for the quilt along on my site, and I'll change that sign up link to that one once we are finished with it. So if you're seeing this late after the quilt along is already finished, no worries, you can still go through and make the quilt with us. So today we're going to start working on blocks, and one of the first things we need to do is make some snowballs. And if you are brand new to quilting and you don't know what a snowball is, no worries, you're about to find out. It's a fun and easy technique, and you'll be able to get it. I do have a demo on snowballing squares in one of my other videos, and I will link to that in the description. The first part of the video is not going to be any different. The first few steps of that are not going to be any different when using those with rectangles versus squares. So I will, in the description, put what point in the video it moves to the rectangles so that you don't have to watch that part again unless you just love to hear my accent. So I'll meet you at the cutting table and let's get started. All right, so let's get started with some snowballs. I've got my cutting mat turned over on the blue side so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. And here I've got my fabrics. Got my color 1 for the pinwheels. I'm going to use this colorway for the blades, for the color 2, and then this will be color 3 or the background. So I'm just going to be working with these two for the snowball demonstration. So I'm going to just move these gorgeous fabrics to the side and then move the blades a little over to the side here too. So what we've got is we have a ruler, and it does not matter how big the ruler is, what size it is. You just want something that is big enough to go all the way across that diagonal. So you're going to take a square and you're going to turn it so that it is face side down. And then I've just got a regular lead pencil here. You're just going to want to, when you start making markings, you're going to want to mark lightly or use a washable marker or washable pen or pencil that you trust to actually wash out. So there are a couple ways that you can mark this line that we're going to draw, and I'm going to show you. The first 2 ways involve using a ruler. So you're going to get your ruler and you're going to line that ruler up corner to corner with your square. Now, just a little tip. Most of the rulers are designed to lay flatter and stay in place better if you have the side where the numbers are written correctly facing up. If you have that side facing down and see that the numbers look backwards to you, and flip it over and have it to where your numbers are facing up. So one of the problems with marking these diagonal lines is a similar problem to what you get when you are sewing on the bias or having your fabric edges on the bias. And what that means is when you cut your fabric, the grain of the fabric goes horizontally and vertically. So if you cut along that grain, there's not going to be any extra stretch in that. So these were cut along the grain, so there's not extra stretch in it. But if you were to cut diagonally, there's going to be a little extra stretch that you have to deal with. This is not something that bothers me, but it does bother a lot of people, and a whole lot of starch or pressing spray when you're pressing your fabric will help a lot with that. But for this, we're going to be marking our line on the diagonal or on the bias. So I've got the lead of this pencil down for right now so I can show you what I'm talking about. So I'm lining this ruler up with each corner, and you can see when I do that, the fabric wants to stretch and kind of move and distort out of shape for me. So something that you can do that helps me is you're going to mark your line from the inside out and then go the other direction from the inside out. And when you place pressure on your ruler to hold it still, you'll want to have your thumb in the middle, close to the place where you're going to start marking, and your fingers up towards the top edge of your ruler, and hold firm pressure. And that's going to keep that still for you when you go to mark your fabric. So inside out, and then when you're done with that side, you're going to move your hands down opposite. So you've got your fingers in the middle close to where you're going to start marking, and your thumb on the end. Hold firm pressure, and that's just going to keep that fabric from moving and distorting shape on you, and mark from the inside out. So now you have a nice line drawn corner to corner on your fabric, and we'll show you what that's for later. So another way that you can mark this, and this is also a way using your ruler, you're going to find the diagonal line on your ruler, and you're going to line that diagonal line on your ruler up with the top corner of your little square. So we've got our square face down, and we're going to line the diagonal line on our ruler up with this edge of the square, and the top corner is going to be in line with this top corner here. So once we get that all lined up, then this side right here, this side of the ruler, should be lined up nicely with this other corner of your fabric, and you're going to do the same thing with your hand position and your marking. So hold firm pressure in the middle and towards the edge of the ruler. Mark from the inside out, and then do that with the opposite side. So that is another way that you can use your ruler to mark these snowballs. And the last way is to press them to mark them. So what you're going to do with that is you're going to fold your square. You want it face side down, and then fold it wrong sides together in half diagonally. Now, this one you have to be a little bit careful with, because you don't want to push hard, pull that, distort that shape. You can use your iron or you can use your fingers, but you want to be careful that you're pressing and not pulling. So even if you're using heat, push down on your iron and hold for a few seconds. Don't move your iron around, because that'll distort the shape of your block. So you can see I'm being careful, and I'm just pressing down, and I'm just making a crease. And that crease line is what I'll use as my guide later on, instead of having to mark it. So I'm just pressing down hard. I'm not pulling hard like this to distort the shape. I'm just pressing down hard. And then when you open that up, you have a nice crease line that's going to be your guide for when you sew in the next steps. Okay, so our next step is going to be to place one of these squares right sides together with one of the rectangles. And it's really important with these snowball rectangles and with this pattern that you follow my diagrams in the pattern exactly, as far as you want your square on the same side of the rectangle as it shows in my pattern. You want your line going in the same direction as it shows in my pattern. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to make a completely different design. And if you don't do the same thing every time, then your design's not going to look right. So what I like to do, I've already got one done here. I like to go ahead and pull up the pattern, or print it out, whatever you need to do, and do one, and then leave that kind of in your workstation where you can see it as kind of a little model, so that you can make sure all the others are the same way. So when we place this square face down on this rectangle, we need to make sure that all that is in the same direction, but we also need to make sure that we are securing this somehow so that when you go to sew it, it stays put for you, because you are sewing along the bias, and you want to stabilize that a little bit, get it to stay put. And I like to just use glue. This is just a washable glue stick that I got from Amazon. And you can also use the Elmer's purple glue sticks, or the Target's knockoff works really good too. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that line that we drew, and we'll flip that over, and along that line, so flip that over to the right side of the fabric, the pretty side of the fabric, and along the part where that line is drawn, you're just going to put some glue. And then you'll lay this on to your rectangle, and once that's nice and even, stacked nicely, you can look and you can see I've got this drawn line going in the same direction as I had it in my model that I did first. So you'll add glue to the pretty side of your fabric and right along this line, and you'll also want to add some glue right here. I wouldn't necessarily worry about adding much glue on this side, but you'll also want to add some glue right here, and that's just going to keep that stable for you when you go to sew. So once you get all of that tacked down in place, you're going to go to your sewing machine and you're going to sew. You can either sew right along that line, or some people like to sew just a hair off. And when I say a hair to the side of the line, that's going to be towards the outside of that line, so towards this corner right here. And the reason some people like to sew just a hair to the outside is because once you get that sewn together, you're going to flip that out, and you'll want that when it's flipped out to line up nicely with the edges here, and that's just going to give you a little bit of wiggle room. But I'm not going to lie, if I did, let's say I wanted to sew a hair to the right and I accidentally sewed right down the line, that is not something that I'm going to rip stitches out over. It is still going to be close enough that it's easily fudgeable for you. If you are using really thick fabric, that would be a time when you'd really want to try to sew to just a hair to the right of that line. But I would suggest you just get some practice fabric that you're not going to be using for the quilt and try it. Try one with it sewn right along the line, flip it out and see how it looks, and try one with it sewn a hair to the outside and see which one you like better. So now we're just going to go to the machine. I've got all of my squares, got the lines drawn on all of them. So we're going to go to the machine and you'll just sew. All right, now that we got all these stacked, it's time to make our stitch line. So I'm going to show you a little tip for that. And one thing that's going to help you when you sew these squares onto your rectangle is that you want to start from sewing from the side that's on the line of the rectangle. You don't want to start sewing from the corner. This is not really a factor if you're snowballing squares, but with rectangles, you'll need to worry about this. And the reason you want to start on this top side, the part where with the side of the rectangle instead of a corner, is just because it's just going to be a lot easier for you. You don't have to worry about your machine eating the fabric in the corner, so you don't have to do anything special to prevent that. So if you just start on this side, it's going to be a lot better and just a little less frustrating for you. And another thing that you can do is you can actually chain piece this. And what chain piecing means is that you are sewing, you'll sew one, go all the way down to the bottom, maybe sew off for about a ½ inch or so, and then sew the next one without stopping and cutting those strings in the middle so that you have one long chain. And I will show you how to do that. All right, so I'm going to show you a little demo for chain piecing. I'm going to do this stitch line. I'm just going slow so that I can stay on that line or a hair to the outside, whatever you want to do. Okay, now that I'm finished, I sewed off the edge maybe about a 1/2 inch or so. And then we're going to raise the presser foot and sew the next one. Now, if your machine does have issues with kind of eating the corner of that fabric, you can always raise the needle and go to where you're a stitch or two in before you start. That'll kind of help it not eat your fabric. And see how we've got these chains where these two are still connected. So you'll just keep feeding those through until you get them all sewn together, and then cut them apart, and we'll do our next step. Okay, now we've got these all sewn together in one long chain, and you're just gonna clip them apart. And once you get them all cut apart, we are ready for the next step. Okay, so now that we have all of our stitch lines sewn and got our units cut apart, I'm going to show you the next step, which is you'll just cut a seam allowance to the outside of that stitch line. And once that's done, you can turn this out and press it. And you will have, if you glue this together, you will have a little glue there. It should pull right apart. And if you are worried about the glue getting on your iron later when you press it, check out the link in the video. You can actually just clean your iron with Tylenol tablets. I wouldn't get the blue and red ones, but the just plain white Tylenol tablets, or acetaminophen, paracetamol, depending on where you are. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually cut a whole bunch of these at once. So you're going to use your 18 by 24 cutting mat or a smaller cutting mat, whatever you have. And we're going to work that small mat to our advantage. This big mat is great, but we can also work a small one to our advantage. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick a line, and I'm using the 17-inch line. It doesn't matter which line, but I'm using 17. And you're going to have the outside corner, the part that you're going to cut off, you want that going in the same direction as your dominant hand. So for me, I'm right-handed, it's going to look like this. But if you're left-handed, you might want it pointed out the other way so it's close to your left hand. So we're going to take that stitch line and we're going to line it up with this 17-inch line that we picked. So line that up. Take the next one and you're going to line the stitch line at the top up with this line, stitch line we have here. And then the one at the bottom, you'll line that up with that same line, that 17-inch line. And you're just going to keep going down, doing that until you run out of space on your mat. Okay, so when you run out of room, got all these lined up, and they don't have to be perfectly spaced. You just want them lined up with whatever line you picked. And it's a good idea to start off with your first row, picking a line over closer to the edge, and you'll see why in just a second. So now we're going to leave those where they are, and we're going to rotate this mat. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to, for this side, I'm going to pick the 3-inch line, just because that gives me a little more, little space in between both of these rows. And we're going to line, just like we did before, we're going to line the stitch line for the first one up with that line that we picked. And then you're going to take the next one and line the top of the stitch line up with this stitch line of the one we've already got laid down. And the bottom of the stitch line, we'll line that up with that line we picked, which is a 3-inch line for me. So you just keep doing that until you run out of space on your mat, just like we did with the first slide. All right, so we got a whole bunch of these lined up, and now you're gonna get your rotary cutter and a ruler, and I'm gonna use my 6x24 ruler, but you can use whatever ruler you want, just so long as it is long enough to go along your whole row. So since when we snowball these, we've already sewn our stitch line exactly where we want it, and we're going to cut the seam allowance later. So since the stitch line is already exactly where we want it, we don't necessarily have to worry that our seam allowances are exactly alike. So what I'm going to do, instead of a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to cut a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And the reason we're going to do that is that if for whatever reason we did not line these up perfectly, that's going to give us a little bit of wiggle room. And since our stitch line was already exactly where we want it, it's okay if our seam allowance is a little more than a 1/4 inch, or if they're not all exactly the same. So I'm going to line the 3/8 inch line on my ruler up with these stitch lines that I have lined up. And you want to make sure that you've got a nice sharp blade on your rotary cutter, because once you get to the middle, you're cutting through a lot of layers. So, you know, your rotary cutter should cut through that pretty easily. And if it's not, it might be time to change the blade. So we're going to just hold firm pressure on our ruler. And there we go. Now, watch this, as this is cool. We're going to be very careful not to move the fabric. Rotate our mat. And do the same thing on the other side. Line the 3/8 inch line on your ruler up with all these stitch lines. And make that cut. So there, guys, we just decornered a whole bunch of these snowballs at once. And once that's done, you just take one of them, move these out of the way so you can see, and you just open that up, and there may be some glue here from where, if you glued that down, but that should peel off pretty easy. And then you're ready to press that, and you're all ready to start sewing some units together.